I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Karen Whitmore standing on my front porch with her phone held up like she was recording evidence of a murder scene. The bass from my speakers was thumping through the walls of my modest ranch house in Henderson, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas, and I was having the time of my life organizing my weekend project in the garage while listening to some classic rock. It was 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon. The sun was blazing down on the desert landscape, and I had every right to enjoy my property the way I saw fit. My name is Xavier, and I had moved into the Sunset Ridge community exactly 8 months ago after finally scraping together enough money for a down payment on this 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom piece of the American dream. I worked as an automotive technician at a busy shop on Boulder Highway, pulling long hours and coming home exhausted most nights. Weekends were sacred to me. They were the only time I could really unwind, work on my project car, and yes, enjoy some music at a reasonable volume while I did it. Karen was the vice president of our homeowners association, a position she wielded like a scepter of absolute authority over the 75 homes in our development. She was 52 years old, always dressed in tennis whites despite never actually playing tennis, and had the kind of severe bob haircut that seemed designed specifically to complement her perpetually pursed lips. Her husband, Gerald, was hardly ever seen, probably because he spent all his time at work avoiding her. I walked to the front door and opened it, keeping my expression neutral. "Can I help you, Karen?" She lowered her phone but kept it recording. "Isaac, this is the 3rd time this month that your music has been absolutely deafening. I can hear it all the way from my house." Her house was 4 doors down and across the street. I found that highly unlikely given that my stereo was decent but not exactly concert-level equipment. It's 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. I'm well within my rights to play music. The HOA guidelines clearly state that residents must not create a disturbance that infringes upon the quiet enjoyment of their neighbors' properties, she recited, as if she had the entire covenant memorized. She probably did. And the Henderson City Ordinance states that daytime noise before 10 p.m. on weekends is permitted as long as it doesn't exceed certain decibel levels, I countered. I had done my homework before moving here, knowing that HOAs could be tricky to navigate. Her face flushed red, a color that clashed terribly with her pink polo shirt. "I will be filing a formal complaint with the board. This is unacceptable behavior for our community." "You do that," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm not breaking any laws." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her white tennis shoes squeaking against the concrete. I watched her go, feeling my good mood evaporate like water on the scorching Nevada pavement. This was exactly the kind of petty neighborhood drama I had hoped to avoid. I went back inside and turned the music down a notch anyway, not because I thought I was in the wrong, but because I knew Karen would make my life miserable if I gave her any ammunition. The rest of my Saturday passed without incident, and I managed to get the new brake calipers installed on my 1987 Mustang GT that I was slowly restoring in my garage. The formal complaint arrived in my mailbox on Tuesday, printed on official HOA letterhead. It was 3 pages long, single-spaced, and detailed every alleged noise violation I had committed since moving in. According to Karen's meticulous records, I had played music too loudly on 6 separate occasions, had my garage door open at unacceptable hours twice, and once had a friend's motorcycle parked in my driveway that violated the community's aesthetic standards. The letter informed me that I was required to attend the next HOA board meeting on the following Thursday evening at 7 p.m., to be held at the community clubhouse. Failure to attend would result in a $50 fine per day until I complied. I crumpled the letter in frustration and then immediately smoothed it back out, knowing I would need it as documentation. I called my buddy Marcus that evening, needing to vent to someone who understood the insanity of HOA politics. Marcus lived in an apartment complex specifically to avoid this kind of nonsense. "Man, she's really got it out for you," Marcus said, laughing on the other end of the line. "What did you do? Reject her advances?" "Don't even joke about that," I said, shuddering at the mental image. "I just want to live my life in peace. Is that too much to ask, in an HOA?" "Yeah, probably," Marcus said. "You need to fight this, though. Don't let her push you around. You know your rights." He was correct. I spent the next 2 evenings researching Henderson noise ordinances, Nevada state laws regarding property rights, and HOA regulations. What I discovered was enlightening. Henderson's noise ordinance specified that daytime noise between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. could not exceed 85 decibels when measured from the property line. Nighttime noise between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. had a limit of 55 decibels. I realized I needed evidence to back up my position. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to an electronics store in Las Vegas and purchased a professional-grade decibel meter for $249. It was more than I wanted to spend, but I considered it an investment in my sanity and my property rights. That evening, I set up a test in my garage. I positioned my stereo exactly where it had been on Saturday, queued up the same Boston album I had been playing, and set the volume to the same level. Then I walked out to the edge of my property line, the boundary between my lot and the community sidewalk, and took measurements with the decibel meter. The results were clear. At my property line, the music registered 67 decibels. Even when I walked to the midpoint between my house and the street, it only hit 72 decibels. I was well within the legal limit. I took photos of the meter's readings with my phone, time-stamped and geotagged, and felt a surge of vindication. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. I dressed in business casual clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, wanting to present myself as a reasonable, responsible homeowner. I gathered my printed research, my photos, and the decibel meter itself, placing everything in a folder that I carried under my arm like a lawyer heading into court. The community clubhouse was a single-story stucco building painted in the same beige tones as every other structure in Sunset Ridge. Inside, the main room had been arranged with a long table at the front for the board members and several rows of folding chairs for residents. About 20 people were scattered throughout the audience, and I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood. Karen sat at the center of the board table, flanked by the HOA president, a retired accountant named Douglas Patterson, and the secretary, a woman in her 60s named Linda Chen. 2 other board members, whose names I could never remember, filled out the remaining seats. I took a seat in the 3rd row, trying to calm my nerves. I had never been good at public speaking, preferring to work with my hands rather than my words, but tonight I would have to be articulate and confident. Douglas called the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m., and they worked through routine business for the first 20 minutes. There was discussion about repainting the community entrance sign, debate over whether to increase the annual HOA dues, and a report on the status of the neighborhood pool maintenance. I fidgeted with my folder, waiting for my item to come up on the agenda. Finally, Douglas cleared his throat and looked down at his papers. "Next, we have a noise complaint filed by Vice President Whitmore against Xavier, property address 147 Sagebrush Lane. Karen, would you like to present your complaint?" Karen stood up, smoothing down her blouse. Tonight she was wearing business attire, a navy blue suit that made her look even more severe. "Thank you, Douglas. As detailed in my written complaint, Mr. Xavier has repeatedly violated our community standards regarding noise and disturbance. Most recently, this past Saturday afternoon, he was playing music at such a volume that I could hear it clearly from my residence, 4 houses away. This is not the first occurrence, and despite my attempts to address this directly with him, he has shown no willingness to be considerate of his neighbors." Several heads in the audience nodded sympathetically. I noticed that one of them was Beverly Martin, Karen's best friend and next-door neighbor, who had probably never heard my music at all but was supporting Karen out of loyalty. "Mr. Xavier, you are here to respond to these allegations?" Douglas asked, peering at me over his reading glasses. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked to the front of the room. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Yes, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to address this board and clear up what I believe is a misunderstanding." "This is not a misunderstanding," Karen interjected. "This is a pattern of disrespectful behavior." "Karen, please let him speak," Linda said gently from her position at the table. I took a breath. "I moved to Sunset Ridge 8 months ago because I wanted to be part of a nice, quiet community. I work hard all week as an automotive technician, and on weekends, I like to work on projects in my garage. Sometimes I play music while I work. This past Saturday, I was playing music at 2:30 in the afternoon, which is well within acceptable daytime hours." "But the volume was excessive," Karen said, unable to help herself. "If I may continue," I said, looking at Douglas rather than Karen. "I understand that HOA guidelines mention not disturbing neighbors, but those guidelines have to be balanced against actual laws. Henderson City Ordinance permits daytime noise up to 85 decibels when measured at the property line. After receiving Mrs. Whitmore's complaint, I purchased a professional decibel meter to test my music levels. I pulled out the device and held it up for the board to see. This is a calibrated meter that meets all professional standards. I recreated the exact conditions from Saturday, same music, same volume, same position of my speakers. At my property line, the music measured 67 decibels. Even at the midpoint between my house and the street, it only reached 72 decibels. I have photographs with timestamps and GPS data to document this." I passed the printed photos to Douglas, who examined them closely before passing them to the other board members. Karen's face was getting redder by the second. "This is irrelevant," she said. "The HOA has the right to establish standards that exceed city ordinances." "Actually, that's not quite correct," I said, pulling out another set of papers. According to Nevada Revised Statutes, Section 116, HOAs cannot enforce rules that violate state or local laws. They also cannot enforce rules that are arbitrary or unreasonable. Since my music is well within legal limits and is only played during daytime hours on weekends, any attempt to restrict it further would likely be considered arbitrary. The room had gone quiet. Several board members were looking at Karen with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to annoyed. I pressed my advantage. "I want to be a good neighbor. I really do. But I also have rights as a property owner, rights that I paid a considerable amount of money to secure when I bought my home here. I am not playing music at excessive volumes. I am not violating any laws. I am simply living my life during daylight hours on the weekend." Douglas set down the photos and looked at Karen. "Did you take any decibel readings yourself, Karen?" She shifted her weight. "I should not have to purchase equipment to document what is obvious to anyone with ears." "So that is a no," Linda said, making a note on her pad. "I think Mr. Xavier has made a compelling case," said one of the other board members, a man named Robert something. If the noise is within legal limits and occurring during reasonable hours, I do not see how we can justify a violation. This sets a terrible precedent, Karen argued, her voice rising. If we allow this, what's next? People having parties every weekend, constant construction noise. We have standards for a reason. And those standards have to be reasonable and legally enforceable, Douglas said firmly. I am inclined to dismiss this complaint. Does anyone disagree? Linda shook her head. Robert and the other board member also indicated they supported dismissing the complaint. Karen looked like she wanted to argue further, but Douglas had already moved on. The complaint is dismissed. Mr. Xavier, thank you for your thorough documentation. Please continue to be mindful of your neighbors, but you are not in violation of any rules. I thanked the board and returned to my seat, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The meeting continued with other business, but I barely heard any of it. I had won. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. After the meeting adjourned, several residents approached me in the parking lot. An older man named Tom Sullivan, who lived 2 streets over, shook my hand. Good for you, standing up to her. Karen's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for too long. A younger couple I had not met before introduced themselves as Ryan and Patricia Morrison. We have been dealing with ridiculous complaints from her too, Patricia said. She threatened to fine us because our trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that it was literally trash day and the truck just had not come yet. I commiserated with them for a few minutes before heading to my truck. As I was unlocking the door, Karen's voice cut through the evening air. This is not over, Isaac. I turned to see her standing a few feet away, her arms crossed and her expression venomous. The board may have dismissed this complaint, but I will be watching you. One mistake, one tiny violation, and I will make sure you regret buying property here. Is that a threat? I asked calmly. It is a promise, she said. You have made an enemy today and you will come to regret it. She walked to her Mercedes SUV and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with an uneasy feeling in my gut. I had won the battle, but something told me the war was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I became acutely aware of just how seriously Karen took her promise. I received a violation notice because my garage door had been left open past 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Never mind that I was still actively working in the garage and the door was open for ventilation. The notice cited a vague provision about maintaining aesthetic standards. Then I got another notice because one of my trash cans had a small crack in the lid. Apparently, this was an eyesore that needed immediate correction. The fine was $25 per day until I replaced the can. The third notice arrived because my front lawn was allegedly not mowed to the proper height. According to Karen's measurement, my grass was 3¼ inches tall, while the HOA standards specified a maximum of 3 inches. I went out with a tape measure and found that my grass was actually 2¾ inches, but by that point, I had already received a $50 fine. I disputed all 3 violations in writing, providing photographic evidence and timestamps for each one. The board meetings to address my disputes were scheduled weeks out, and in the meantime, the fines continued to accumulate. I could see the strategy clearly now. Karen could not win on legitimate grounds, so she was going to bury me in paperwork and penalties until I either gave up or moved away. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I spent an evening researching attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes and found a firm in Las Vegas called Morrison and Associates. The name made me think of the couple I had met in the parking lot, though I doubted they were related. I called first thing Monday morning and was able to schedule a consultation for that Wednesday. The attorney I met with was a sharp woman in her late 30s named Jennifer Morrison. She listened to my story, reviewed all my documentation, and nodded thoughtfully throughout. "This is textbook HOA harassment," she said when I finished. "You have strong grounds for a counter-complaint, possibly even a lawsuit if she continues. The problem is, litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Before we go that route, let me send a letter to your HOA board on your behalf." Sometimes that is enough to make them back off. I agreed to let her send the letter, and by Friday, it was delivered via certified mail to each board member. The letter politely but firmly outlined the harassment I had experienced, cited relevant case law about HOA overreach, and suggested that the board might want to reconsider the violations Karen had issued. The effect was immediate. Douglas called me personally on Saturday morning, sounding embarrassed and apologetic. "Isaac, I want you to know that the board has voted to dismiss all pending violations against you and refund any fines you have paid. We have also voted to require that any future violations filed by Karen must be reviewed and approved by at least one other board member before being issued." "I appreciate that, Douglas," I said. "I really just want to live in peace. I understand, and I am sorry you have had to deal with this. Between you and me, Karen has been getting more aggressive with enforcement lately, and several residents have complained. We are working on the situation." I thanked him and ended the call, feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe this really was the end of it. Maybe Karen would finally leave me alone. I should have known better. The next Saturday, I was in my garage around 3 p.m., working on installing a new exhaust system on my Mustang. My music was playing at a reasonable volume, probably even quieter than the day that started all of this. I was focused on loosening a stubborn bolt when I heard shouting from my driveway. I rolled out from under the car to see Karen marching toward my garage, her phone held up and recording as usual. Behind her were 2 Henderson police officers, both looking somewhat confused and uncomfortable. "That is him," Karen was saying to the officers. "That is the man who has been harassing this neighborhood with his noise for months." I stood up, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "Officers, can I help you?" The older of the 2 cops, a Hispanic man with sergeant stripes, stepped forward. "Sir, we received a noise complaint from this residence. Can you turn down your music for a moment?" I walked over and turned off my stereo completely. "Of course, Sergeant, I am happy to cooperate." "We can clearly hear it from the street," Karen insisted. "It is creating a public disturbance." The sergeant looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "Madam, with all due respect, we were standing on the street for about 2 minutes before approaching, and we could barely hear the music. It certainly was not what I would classify as a disturbance." "But it is Saturday afternoon, and he does this every weekend," Karen protested. "Which is perfectly legal," the younger officer said. He looked to be in his late 20s, and his name tag read Officer Briggs. "Madam, there is no violation here. People are allowed to play music on their own property during the day." I decided to help them out. "Officers, if you would not mind, I actually have a decibel meter right here. Would you be willing to test the noise level? I think it would help settle this matter definitively." The sergeant looked relieved to have a concrete solution. "That would be fine, sir." I retrieved my decibel meter from my workbench and turned my music back on to the previous volume. The 4 of us walked out to the property line, and I handed the meter to Officer Briggs. He took readings at several points, showing them to his sergeant each time. 65 decibels at the property line, Briggs said. 71 at the midpoint. These are well within legal limits, even for nighttime hours. Karen's face was doing that tomato red thing again. "This is absurd. I have rights as a homeowner too. I should not have to listen to his noise. Madam, the sergeant said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You called 911, which is for emergencies, to report a noise complaint that does not meet any legal threshold for a violation. You pulled 2 officers away from actual police work to deal with a neighborhood dispute that should be handled through your homeowners association. I am going to strongly suggest that you not call us again unless there is an actual emergency or violation of law. Do you understand? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Are you telling me I cannot report crimes? I am telling you that this is not a crime, the sergeant said firmly. This is a civil matter and you need to handle it through proper channels. Good afternoon, madam. He turned to me. Sorry to bother you, sir. Enjoy your weekend. The officers walked back to their patrol car and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway with Karen. She was shaking with rage. You think you are so smart, she hissed. You think you have won. But I will find a way to get you out of this community. I swear it. Karen, this has to stop, I said, trying to keep my voice reasonable despite my own rising anger. I am not your enemy. I am just a guy trying to live his life. Why do you have such a problem with me? Because people like you ruin neighborhoods, she said. You move in, you do not respect the standards that the rest of us work hard to maintain, and you act like you are above the rules. This community was peaceful before you arrived. I follow all the rules, I said. Every single one. You are the one who keeps inventing violations that do not exist. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. I will make your life a living hell. You will move out of here one way or another. I have got that threat on video, by the way, said a voice from the street. We both turned to see Ryan Morrison standing on the sidewalk with his phone held up. I heard the commotion and started recording. I got everything from when you told him you would make his life hell until just now. That is harassment, Karen. Legally actionable harassment. Karen went pale. Without another word, she turned and practically ran back to her Mercedes, speeding away fast enough to leave rubber marks on the pavement. Ryan walked up to my driveway, lowering his phone. Are you okay, man? Yeah, thanks for that, I said, feeling shaky. She is completely unhinged. Tell me about it. Patricia and I have been documenting her behavior for months. We are actually planning to run for the HOA board in the next election. There are a lot of people in this community who are sick of her act. When is the election? I asked. 3 months. We are putting together a whole slate of candidates to replace her and her cronies. Would you be interested in running? I considered it. The idea of getting more involved in HOA politics did not appeal to me, but if it meant getting rid of Karen, it might be worth it. Let me think about it. Right now, I just want to finish working on my car. Ryan clapped me on the shoulder. Fair enough. I will send you the video of her threatening you. You should give it to your lawyer. He did exactly that, and on Monday morning I forwarded the video to Jennifer Morrison. She called me back within an hour. This is gold, she said bluntly. This is explicit harassment and intimidation. I can file for a restraining order against her, and I can probably get the HOA board to remove her from her position if we push hard enough. Do you want to pursue this? I thought about it. Part of me just wanted to let it go to avoid more drama and conflict. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being pushed around, wanted justice. Yes, let's do it. Jennifer filed for a temporary restraining order on Tuesday. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the Las Vegas Township Justice Court. I took the day off work and met Jennifer at the courthouse at 8:30 in the morning. Karen was there with her own attorney, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit who clearly wished he was anywhere else. When our case was called, we all stood before Judge Margaret Rodriguez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who reviewed the paperwork with a critical eye. Jennifer presented our case efficiently, playing the video of Karen's threats and providing documentation of the pattern of harassment, including the false violation notices and the unnecessary police call. Karen's attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Karen was simply trying to enforce HOA rules, but Judge Rodriguez was not buying it. "Madam," the judge said, addressing Karen directly, "you are vice president of your homeowners association, which means you have a responsibility to enforce rules fairly and reasonably. What I see here is a pattern of targeting one specific resident with frivolous complaints after he successfully defended himself against your initial complaint. That is not proper enforcement. That is a personal vendetta." "Your Honor, I was simply trying to maintain community standards," Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "By calling the police on a Saturday afternoon for music that was well within legal limits," Judge Rodriguez said. "By threatening to make his life a living hell. By issuing violation notices for grass that was measured incorrectly. I do not think so." The judge granted the temporary restraining order, which prohibited Karen from contacting me directly, from coming within 50 feet of my property, and from issuing any HOA violations against me without approval from the full board. The order would remain in effect for 1 year, at which point we could petition to make it permanent if necessary. Karen left the courthouse looking defeated, and I felt a tremendous sense of relief. Maybe now I could finally have some peace. The fallout from the restraining order was swift and dramatic. Within a week, 3 board members, including Douglas Patterson, submitted a petition to remove Karen from her position as vice president, citing her abuse of authority and the embarrassment she had brought to the community. The vote was held at an emergency board meeting, and Karen was removed by a count of 4-1, with only her friend Beverly voting to keep her. Linda Chen was appointed interim vice president, and she immediately began reviewing all outstanding violations to determine which ones were legitimate and which were examples of Karen's overreach. Out of 37 active violations, Linda found that 23 were questionable or completely baseless. Those were all dismissed, and refunds were issued to the affected homeowners. The community newsletter, which went out at the end of that month, included a carefully worded announcement about recent changes to HOA enforcement policies, and a reminder that all residents had the right to appeal violations. Reading between the lines was easy. Karen had been abusing her power, and the board was trying to clean up the mess. Ryan and Patricia Morrison followed through on their plan to run for the board. They recruited 2 other candidates, including Tom Sullivan, the older man who had congratulated me after the first board meeting. I decided not to run myself, but volunteered to help with their campaign, printing flyers and knocking on doors to talk to neighbors. The election was held on a Tuesday evening in early November, 3 months after the restraining order hearing. The turnout was huge by HOA standards, with over 60% of homeowners casting ballots. When the results were announced, Ryan, Patricia, and Tom all won seats, replacing 3 of Karen's allies who had chosen not to run for re-election. Douglas Patterson also stepped down as president, saying he wanted to retire from HOA politics entirely, and Ryan was elected as the new president. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month, the new board had revised the enforcement policies, created an appeals process that was fair and transparent, and eliminated several outdated rules that had been causing problems for residents. Karen herself seemed to disappear from community life. I saw her occasionally, coming and going from her house, but she never made eye contact and never spoke. Her Mercedes was gone more often than not, and through the neighborhood grapevine, I heard that she had taken a part-time job at a boutique in Las Vegas, probably just to get out of the house and away from the community where she had once wielded so much power. I continued to work on my Mustang on weekends, playing my music at reasonable volumes and enjoying my property without fear of retaliation. The project was coming along nicely. I had finished the exhaust system, rebuilt the engine, and was working on restoring the interior. It was therapeutic, using my hands to create something beautiful and functional, and the music was an essential part of that process. One Saturday in late January, almost 6 months after the whole mess had started, I was buffing out the Mustang's new paint job when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to find Linda Chen standing at the edge of my driveway, holding a plate covered in aluminum foil. "Hi, Isaac," she said with a warm smile. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," I said, setting down my buffer. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to bring you these," she said, offering me the plate. "Homemade cookies as a thank you for everything you did." I lifted the foil to reveal 2 dozen perfect chocolate chip cookies. "Thank you, Linda, but I am not sure what you are thanking me for." "For standing up to Karen," she said simply. "For not backing down when she tried to bully you. For helping Ryan and Patricia and Tom get elected. You changed this community for the better, and a lot of us are grateful." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I just wanted to listen to my music in peace. "And that is exactly why it mattered," Linda said. "You were not trying to be a hero or make a point. You were just defending your basic rights as a homeowner. But in doing that, you showed the rest of us that we did not have to put up with Karen's behavior. You gave people courage to speak up." We chatted for a few more minutes before Linda headed home, and I went back to work on my car with a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with the paint job. The Mustang was looking good, really good. Another month or two and it would be ready for its first real drive. February arrived with unseasonably warm weather, even for Nevada. I took advantage of the sunshine to work on installing new seats in the Mustang, a task that required precision and patience. My music was playing, classic rock as always, and I was completely absorbed in the work when I heard footsteps on my driveway. I rolled out from under the car, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a package delivery, but instead, I found myself looking at Karen Whitmore. She was standing about 10 feet away, careful not to violate the restraining order's 50-foot limit from my property line, and she looked different, smaller somehow, less angry. "I know I am not supposed to talk to you," she said quietly. "But I wanted to say something and then I will go and you will never have to deal with me again." I stood up, wary but curious. "Okay." She took a breath as if gathering courage. "I am sorry for all of it. The complaints, the harassment, the threats. It was wrong and I am sorry." I had not been expecting that. I searched her face for signs of manipulation or sarcasm but found only what looked like genuine regret. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do all that?" She looked down at her feet. "My son died 2 years ago, car accident. He was 28. After that, I just felt so angry all the time, and I did not know what to do with it. Gerald works all the time because he does not know how to talk about it, and I threw myself into the HOA because it gave me something to control. But it turned into something ugly. I turned into something ugly. My anger, which I had been carrying for months, began to soften. "I am sorry about your son. That is a terrible thing to go through. It does not excuse what I did to you," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "You were just living your life and I made you miserable for no good reason. I am getting help now, therapy. I am trying to be better. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry and that you did not deserve any of it." "Thank you for saying that," I said, and I meant it. Holding on to anger was exhausting, and if Karen was genuinely trying to change, I saw no reason to keep punishing her. I appreciate the apology. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and turned to leave. Your car looks really good, by the way, she said over her shoulder. Your son would have loved it. It is my car, I called after her, confused. I know, she said. I just meant that anyone would love it. It is beautiful. She walked away, and I stood there for a long moment processing the conversation. People were complicated. Karen had been awful to me, truly awful, but she was also a grieving mother who had lost her way. That did not erase what she had done, but it added context, nuance, humanity. I went back to work on the Mustang, but my mind kept returning to the encounter. Eventually, I turned off the music and just worked in silence, thinking about pain and anger and forgiveness, about communities and rules and what it meant to be a good neighbor. The Mustang was finished by mid-March. I took it for its maiden voyage on a Sunday morning, cruising down the highway with the windows down, and the engine purring like it had come straight from the factory floor. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my life, seeing months of hard work pay off in such a tangible way. When I got back to Sunset Ridge, I found several neighbors gathered in my driveway, including Ryan, Patricia, Tom, and Linda. They had heard the engine and come out to see the finished product. This is incredible, Ryan said, walking around the car with an admiring eye. You did all this yourself. Every bit of it, I said proudly. Well, except the paint. I had that done professionally because I did not trust myself not to screw it up. We spent the next hour talking about cars and restoration projects and life in the community. The conversation was easy and warm, and I realized that I had found something here that I had not been looking for. Not just a house, but a home. Not just neighbors, but friends. Later that evening, as the sun was setting over the desert, I sat on my front porch with a cold beer and looked out over Sunset Ridge. The houses glowed in the golden light, and I could hear kids playing in a yard down the street, someone mowing their lawn, a dog barking happily. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How's the HOA life treating you? I smiled and typed back. Pretty good, actually. Pretty damn good. The next week, I received a certified letter from the HOA, and my stomach dropped for a moment before I remembered that Karen was no longer in charge. I opened it to find a notification about the annual community barbecue, scheduled for the first Saturday in April. All residents were invited, and there would be food, music, and games for kids. I decided to go. When the day arrived, I walked over to the community park area where the event was being held, bringing a case of soda to contribute. The turnout was impressive, with at least 50 people milling around, eating hamburgers and hot dogs, playing volleyball, and generally enjoying the spring weather. Ryan spotted me and waved me over to where he was manning the grill. Isaac, glad you made it. What do you want? Burger, dog brat? Burger sounds great, I said. While Ryan assembled my food, I scanned the crowd and noticed Karen standing off to the side with Gerald, who I was seeing in person for the first time. They were not socializing much, just standing together and watching the festivities. Linda followed my gaze. I invited them, she said quietly. I thought it might help. Karen's been through a lot, and I think she is really trying to change. Gerald seems like a decent guy who has been dealing with his own grief. That is kind of you, I said, and it was. Linda had a generous spirit, always looking for ways to build bridges rather than burn them. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself enjoying the barbecue more than I had expected. I played horseshoes with Tom Sullivan, talked automotive projects with a guy named Dave who lived on the far side of the community, and even helped organize a water balloon toss for the kids. Around 4 p.m., I was standing near the dessert table, debating between brownies and cookies when Gerald approached me. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and a gentle face that looked perpetually tired. "Isaac Xavier?" he asked, extending his hand. "I am Gerald Whitmore." I wanted to introduce myself and apologize for my wife's behavior last year. I shook his hand. "Your wife already apologized herself. It is in the past." "Still, it could not have been easy dealing with all that," Gerald said. "Karen told me about your conversation, about what she said. I think that was the first time she really confronted what she had been doing since we lost Matthew. So thank you, in a way, for holding your ground. It forced her to get help." "I am sorry about your son," I said. "I cannot imagine what that has been like for you both." Gerald's eyes welled up, but he kept his composure. "Some days are harder than others, but we are working through it, together, finally." We talked for a few more minutes before Gerald excused himself to rejoin Karen. I watched them walk away, his arm around her shoulders, and felt a sense of closure that I had not known I needed. The barbecue wound down as evening approached. I helped clean up, breaking down tables and collecting trash, chatting with neighbors the whole time. By the time I walked back to my house, the sun was setting, and I felt genuinely content. That night, I sat in my garage with a beer, looking at my completed Mustang and thinking about everything that had happened since I moved to Sunset Ridge. It had been a wild ride, full of conflict and stress and unexpected turns, but I had come out the other side stronger, more confident in my rights and my place in the community. My phone rang and I saw Marcus's name on the screen. "Hey man, what is up? Just checking in." "Still dealing with the HOA Nazi?" "Actually, no, long story, but it all worked out. The bad board members are gone and the community's a lot better now." "No kidding, that is awesome. Hey, I was calling because I might actually be looking at houses. I am sick of apartment life." "Yeah. You should check out Sunset Ridge. We have got a couple places for sale right now." Marcus laughed. "After everything you went through, why would I do that? Because it is a good place, truly. And because we have got a new HOA board that actually cares about being fair. Plus, I am here." "I will think about it. Send me some listings if you see any good ones." We talked for another 20 minutes before hanging up, and I found myself hoping Marcus would follow through. It would be nice to have my best friend living nearby. Spring turned to summer, and life in Sunset Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked at the shop during the week, took my Mustang out for drives on the weekends, and got more involved in community activities. I even joined the social committee, helping to organize a 4th of July block party that was a massive success. Karen and Gerald kept mostly to themselves, but on the rare occasions when I saw Karen, she would offer a small wave or a nod. It was not friendship, but it was peaceful, which was all I needed. In August, Marcus called to tell me he had made an offer on a house 3 streets over from mine. "You convinced me," he said. "Plus, the place has a huge garage perfect for projects." "That is fantastic," I said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." His closing was scheduled for September, and I looked forward to having him nearby. We could work on cars together, grab beers without driving across town, and generally just hang out the way we had before I moved to Henderson. But before Marcus could move in, something happened that I never saw coming. It was a Tuesday evening in late August, around 7 p.m. I was making dinner when I heard sirens, lots of them, coming down our street. I stepped outside to see 3 police cars and an unmarked sedan pulled up in front of Karen and Gerald's house. Several neighbors had come out of their homes, watching with confusion and concern as officers approached the Whitmore's front door. I walked down the street to where Ryan and Patricia were standing on their lawn. "What is going on?" I asked. "No idea," Ryan said. But that is a lot of cops for a wellness check. We watched as Gerald answered the door and spoke with the officers. After a moment, he stepped aside and let them enter. 5 minutes later, they emerged with Karen in handcuffs. She was not fighting or protesting, just walking with her head down as they guided her to one of the patrol cars. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation for the rest of the evening. By the next morning, the truth had started to emerge through various channels. Linda, who still had connections with the old board, found out first and called an emergency meeting of anyone who wanted to know what was happening. About 30 residents gathered at the clubhouse that evening, including me. Linda stood at the front of the room, looking uncomfortable. "I want to be clear that I am not gossiping," she said. "But since this affects our community, I think people deserve to know the basic facts." Karen Whitmore was arrested yesterday on charges of embezzlement. According to the police, she has been stealing money from the HOA treasury for approximately 18 months. The total amount is somewhere around $47,000. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. $47,000 was a staggering amount for a community our size. Linda continued, "The new board recently hired an independent accountant to audit our finances, just as part of general good governance. The accountant discovered irregularities and reported them to the police. That is all I know right now." I sat there, stunned. Karen had been so focused on enforcing petty rules and attacking me over music volume, all while stealing tens of thousands of dollars from the community. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Over the next several weeks, more details came out. Karen had been using her position as vice president to approve fake invoices for community maintenance that never happened. She would write checks to shell companies she had set up, then deposit the money into her personal accounts. The scheme had been surprisingly sophisticated, and she probably would have gotten away with it if the new board had not ordered the audit. Gerald filed for divorce within a week of her arrest. According to the rumor mill, he had no idea what Karen had been doing and was devastated by the betrayal. He put their house up for sale and moved out before the end of September. Karen's trial was scheduled for November. She initially pleaded not guilty, but her lawyer convinced her to take a plea deal in early October. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement and 1 count of fraud. In exchange for the plea, the prosecution agreed to recommend a sentence of 3 to 5 years in state prison, with a requirement that she repay the full amount stolen plus interest. I attended the sentencing hearing, not out of any desire for vengeance, but because I felt like I needed to see the conclusion of this strange chapter in my life. The courtroom was half full, with several Sunset Ridge residents in attendance. Karen looked small and frail as she stood before the judge, a different man than Judge Rodriguez, who had granted my restraining order. Her attorney gave a statement about her mental health struggles and her grief over losing her son, painting her as a troubled woman who had made terrible choices during a dark period of her life. The prosecutor countered by emphasizing the calculated nature of the theft, the breach of trust, and the impact on the community. "This was not a momentary lapse in judgment," the prosecutor said. "This was a sustained criminal enterprise that lasted over a year and a half. Mrs. Whitmore abused her position of authority to steal from her neighbors, people who had trusted her to manage their finances responsibly." When Karen was given a chance to speak, she stood and addressed the judge directly. "I know there is nothing I can say that will make this right. I stole from good people, people who deserved better. I was angry and lost, and I made choices that I will regret for the rest of my life. I am sorry, truly sorry, and I accept whatever punishment the court decides is appropriate." The judge sentenced her to 4 years in Nevada State Prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, though everyone knew that the money was mostly gone and recovering it would be difficult at best. As the bailiff led Karen away, she glanced at the gallery and made eye contact with me for just a moment. I saw shame there, and sadness and resignation. Then she was gone, disappearing through a side door to begin serving her sentence. Outside the courthouse, several neighbors gathered to talk about the sentencing. Tom Sullivan shook his head. 4 years. That is a long time, but I guess she earned it. I just feel bad for Gerald, Patricia said. He lost his son and now his wife is going to prison. That is a lot for one person to handle. We dispersed after a few minutes, everyone heading back to their normal lives. I drove back to Henderson, processing everything I had seen and heard. Karen had been my antagonist, my nemesis for a brief period, but she was also a human being who had suffered and made catastrophic mistakes. I did not forgive the theft, but I could acknowledge the complexity of the situation. Marcus moved into his new house the following week, and I helped him unpack and get settled. His garage was indeed massive, easily big enough for both of our project cars and then some. We spent the whole weekend organizing his tools and setting up his workspace, and it felt good to have my best friend nearby again. So this is the infamous Sunset Ridge, Marcus said as we sat on his back patio on Sunday evening, drinking beers and watching the sun set over the desert. It looks pretty normal to me. It is normal now, I said, but it was crazy there for a while. I still cannot believe she was stealing all that money while harassing you about music. That is some next-level hypocrisy. Tell me about it, but it is over now. New board, new rules, and hopefully, a new chapter for the community. We clinked our bottles together and drank to that. The HOA used Karen's arrest as an opportunity to completely overhaul their financial procedures. They implemented new controls, requiring multiple signatures on checks over a certain amount, quarterly audits by an independent accountant, and full transparency with regular financial reports sent to all homeowners. The board also took out insurance to protect against future embezzlement, something they should have done years ago. By the end of the year, Sunset Ridge felt like a completely different place than when I had moved in. The toxic culture of petty enforcement and favoritism was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of community and mutual respect. People helped each other out, looked out for one another's properties, and actually enjoyed living in the neighborhood. I continued to work on cars in my garage, playing my music at reasonable volumes and never worrying about complaints or violations. The decibel meter sat on my workbench, a reminder of everything that had happened, but I never needed to use it again. On New Year's Eve, Ryan and Patricia hosted a party at their house, inviting the whole neighborhood. I brought Marcus along, and we had a great time, counting down to midnight with about 40 of our neighbors, celebrating not just the new year but everything we had been through together. As the fireworks burst over Henderson, lighting up the desert sky, I thought about how much my life had changed in the past 18 months. I had moved to Sunset Ridge looking for a quiet place to live, a simple piece of the American dream. What I found instead was drama, conflict, and eventually, resolution and community. I learned that standing up for your rights matters, even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. I learned that people are complicated, capable of both great cruelty and genuine change. And I learned that sometimes the best communities are the ones that have been tested and come out stronger on the other side. The music that had started everything, the classic rock I loved to play while working on my projects, continued to be a source of joy and relaxation. But now, I could enjoy it without fear, without looking over my shoulder for Karen and her phone, without worrying about the next violation notice or police visit. I was home, truly home, in a community that had learned to respect both rules and rights, authority and freedom, structure and individuality. Sunset Ridge was not perfect, but it was ours, shaped by everyone who lived there and committed to making it better. Marcus nudged me as the fireworks finale lit up the sky. "Happy New Year, man. Here is to a boring, drama-free year." I laughed and raised my beer. "I will drink to that." But even as I said it, I knew that boring was overrated. The conflict with Karen had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also brought people together, exposed corruption, and ultimately made Sunset Ridge a better place to live. Sometimes you need a little drama to shake things up, to remind people what they are fighting for and what kind of community they want to build. The next morning, January 1st, I woke up with a mild hangover and a sense of contentment. I made coffee, walked out to my garage and looked at my Mustang gleaming in the morning light. Then, I fired up my stereo, queued up some Boston, and got to work on my next project. A 1972 Chevelle that Marcus and I had bought together as a joint restoration effort. The music flowed through my garage and out into the quiet neighborhood morning. 67 decibels at the property line, well within legal limits, perfectly acceptable, and nobody complained.